So apparently Mr. Milchek has lied to Mark about everything he told them in the first episode. It has not been 4 months since the end of the first season. It's only been one weekend. So there is no Lumen reform, and everything Milchek said, we can pretty much throw it out the window because Mr. Milchek would have said anything to have Mark come back because they need Mark for the Cold Harbor. But the question is, what is the Cold Harbor and what is Lumen hiding? We're going to break that all down, but before we do that, we have to start at the beginning of the episode because the episode starts off with a flashback of the events of the season 1 finale. More specifically though, the after effects of Mr. Milchek tackling Dylan and the Audis going back into the real bodies. Mark found himself in the middle of his sister's house with a picture of his wife, aka Miss Casey. But to me, the more interesting part about all this is Haley finding herself face to face with her father. And her father said something that was very interesting. He called her a fetid mop. I don't know what that means, but I could try to break it down. And the closest thing I got to was the fact that the word fetid kind of means stinky or bad, almost as though he's disappointed in her, because essentially she almost blew up the entirety of Lumen Industries' Severance program, and she needs to fix it up ASAP, which is why Haley sent Mr. Milchek to go talk to the Audis. And I have to say, Mr. Milchek is my favorite character, so seeing him ride that motorcycle was pretty cool. But like I said in my last video, we knew Miss Cobell would be back, and she's this episode. But instead of getting fired, Lumen Industries actually gives her a raise, but Miss Cobell only accepts after Haley issues an apology. What's really interesting about this scene is even though Haley gave her a promotion, the promotion doesn't feel like a real promotion. It more feels like they're sidelining her, and Miss Cobell can kind of feel this. Kind of like how I feel like you guys forgot to click the subscribe button, which plays into why she had that freak out at the end of the episode when she was confronted by Mark. But we're going to get into that later because apparently outside of everyone who was in the immediate vicinity of the characters who were Severance, nobody actually knows that the Innies tried to escape, which is why to save face, Mr. Milchek ends up firing the other characters, all except for Mark. We see him go to Irvin first, and we actually learn Irvin's last name. Irvin's last name is Bailiff, which I think us learning the characters' last names are going to be super important because we also learn Dylan's last name, which is George, later in the episode. But as Milchek was firing Dylan and Irvin, the interaction between him and Dylan was whatever. But if you look at the interaction between him and Irvin, that one was kind of tense because I feel like Mr. Milchek knows Irvin is hiding something, and at the same time, we know Irvin is trying to do something to expose Mr. Milchek as well as Lumen. Remember what Irvin saw in the first season when he was going through his Audi's belongings? He saw that his Audi was looking into Lumen Industries and trying to expose what they have going on. So could he be a part of the people who are trying to break Severance? Since later on in the episode, when no one's around, Irvin actually went outside to make a phone call, or at least he thought no one was around, but Bert G is back in the picture. And I think the reason Bert G is following him is because if you remember back in the first episode of season 2, when Irvin comes through the elevator and his Innie's back, we see him pretty much banging on the door calling for Bert. What I'm assuming happened was he was actually banging on Bert G's door when Dylan got tackled. So when Bert opened the door, he snapped. So when both Irving and Bert's Audis met each other, they didn't know each other. I'm assuming Irvin apologized and went home, but Bert followed him nonetheless. That's something I think that's going to play out throughout this season. But the most interesting thing that Irving did was that phone call he made. Whoever was on the other line did not pick up, but he left an interesting message. And that message says his Innie got the message, almost as though he's trying to get his Innie to see what he's seeing. The reason I say that is throughout the first season, every time we saw Irving's Audi, he's painting the exact same room, and that kind of bled into his Innie's work life because while Irving was on the Severance floor throughout the first season, we saw him seeing this black ink. So it's almost as though Irv on the outside is trying to communicate with the Irv on the inside. And we know that's possible because of what Mr. Milchek told Mark in this episode. When Mr. Milchek was talking to Mark and he was trying to get Mark to come back to Lumen, not only did he offer Mark a 20% raise, and at that point, I don't know about you guys, but if anyone offers me a 20% raise, I'm most likely going back to work, so I don't blame Mark. On top of giving him supervised third-party support, which I think is another lie. But the third thing he said to Mark was, Mark found love inside of the Severance floor, referring to Mark's relationship with Haley, but more specifically, Milchek said that Mark said he joined the Severance program because every day he thought about his wife. Every single day felt like an entire year. But the key thing Milchek said was the happiness that Mark is finding inside the Severance floor could trickle onto his character on the outside, and hopefully the outside version of Mark can start to feel what the inside Mark is feeling. And we saw this kind of happen in the first season with Petey. Petey began messaging himself on the floor and outside once he started breaking the Severance protocol. So Irving knows about this loophole, which is why he continuously paints the same picture over and over again as a way to ingrain it into his own mind. So when he's on the Severance floor, he can try to break the connection or whatever is keeping him severed. And I think that's going to happen to Mark later on this season, because as the episode goes on, his love for his wife, Gemma, aka Miss Casey, is going to push him through, and he's going to start to remember certain things. So let's talk about Mark's wife for a second, Gemma, aka Miss Casey. Mark told his sister that he identified Gemma's body when she died. However, in that same sentence, Mark said that her body was burnt. So apparently he didn't really identify her. Lumen actually gave him a fake body because they have his wife and they're keeping her inside of Lumen Industries in perpetuity. So whoever Mark identified was not his wife, but it was close enough to his wife where a burnt version of her body could be somewhat identified, which I think that ties directly into what the Cold Harbor could be. I think it has something to do with Mark and his wife. There's a reason why they only wanted Mark to come back, and there's a reason why they're keeping his wife, Miss Casey. And what's interesting is they have them interact, but because both of them are severed on the severed floor, they don't know each other. But I know if you guys paid attention to Mark in the first season, whenever him and his wife got close to each other, there was a sense of, I feel like he actually cared about her, even though Mark's a nice guy. I'm not saying he was actually trying to go after Miss Casey, even though Mark is the one character on the show who seems to have all the girls. But I think there's a connection deeper there. It goes to show that whatever this Cold Harbor is, it's of an utmost importance to Lumen Industries, to the point where they would go back and hire people they fired, especially Irving, because I know Mr. Milchek knows Irving is hiding something, and I know Lumen is watching Mark like a hawk. There's a reason why they had Mr. Drummond following him and his sister throughout the episode, because while they were at the bar, Mr. Drummond was there listening. He was also there in the room when Helly was giving Miss Cobell the promotion. So we know he's a pretty important player. He might be a part of the board, or he might just be their muscle on the outside. But I think he's a part of the board because when Helly told Miss Cobell that the board apologizes, he was there. He seems to be very in on everything that's going on with Severance, and he might have been the one that was responsible for Mark's wife's quote-unquote death. He's also keeping his eye on Mark's sister, and he's telling them that Mark's sister may be a problem. But before we talk about Miss Cobell and her role in this episode, let's take a minute to talk about Dylan G. And Dylan's outside character, it's weird because every character that we know on the Severance floor aside from Helly is there for a reason. Mark is there to try to forget about his wife. Irving is there because he lost his father, and I feel like he lost his father with something that has to deal with Lumen Industries. But when it came to Dylan, we didn't really know why he was there. But from his Audi's perspective, he's only there for the money. He can't keep a job on the outside world, and he's a total D-bag because after he didn't get the job at the door company, you saw how he snapped at his wife. We could see that there may be an issue with his family dynamic. Maybe he doesn't have enough money, and he clearly has a younger child aside from his son, because the son that we saw in the first season would not be a son that needed baby wipes. So maybe he's there only for work, or maybe he's there to escape his family life because he doesn't make enough money, he needs to get away from them, and he clearly doesn't love his wife for him to be snapping on her the way he does. But his Audi's journey shows us just how much the outside world does not like the Severance program, because even though he totally killed that interview that he took for the door company, once they found out that he worked from the Severance floor, they didn't want him. Almost like they were discriminating against them, which should be illegal. But Severance is kind of like a mirror of our society where now the big multinationals are controlling what's happening. I'm interested to see how that plays out. But let's dive into Miss Cobell and her interactions with Mark. Because throughout the episode, Mark has been waiting for her. When he finally confronts her, she says something very interesting to Mark. She said Mark did not quit because Mark is easy to sway. And that made me think about Cold Harbor. They're finding someone like Mark and keeping Mark because Mark was the one of the characters who were the most easily swayed, the most easily controlled. And is whatever Cold Harbor is a form of mind control? I mean, it has to be, right? If you guys remember in the first season of Severance, Mark was like the teacher's pet, eager to please everybody, eager to do his job, and he's pretty good at it, which is why they need him maybe this whole thing is a form of mind control. But when Mark confronted her about Gemma, she all but confirmed to him that his wife is alive, which essentially confirms what Mark's sister has been telling him the entire episode. But I feel like his sister didn't want to throw too much onto him because she loves her brother and she clearly loves Gemma, aka Miss Casey. And I think Miss Cobell can see the love that Mark has for his wife, which is why she was so torn and essentially screamed and drove off when Mark confronted her, because she knows what she's doing to him is wrong, but because she's such a loyalist to Lumen, she just can't let him go. I can't decide at this point who's more loyal to Lumen, Miss Cobell or Mr. Milchek. Again, Mr. Milchek is my favorite character, but the things he's willing to do for this company. Remember in my last video I said in the first episode, he's clearly lying to Dylan about this outside family unification thing because he's a company man through and through, and this is his big break. He's the one who handled the situation. He's the one who got Mark back in line, and Lumen Industries is rewarding him with the position of leader of the Severance floor. But then Miss Cobell went and undermined him yet again. She's been undermining him since the first episode, so I like this dynamic and I like seeing where this is going. But guys, that's just my thoughts on the second episode. I'd love to hear your thoughts about it in the comment section below. What do you think the Cold Harbor is? Because my theory is it's some form of mind control where they're taking your body and trying to erase your consciousness on a more global scale. And that's why they're using Mark as the perfect guinea pig and having his wife be there. Imagine walking by your wife, your kids, or anyone and just not knowing exactly who they are. That's going to be game changing. But I'd love to hear your thoughts about it in the comment section below. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button, and until next time, peace.